Good morning. Thank you for joining us so bright and early. I actually don't know if it's bright out there yet. It is San Francisco. But thank you for joining us at 8 a.m. for providing guided user experiences for managing ISV custom metadata. I know it's a lot of words in a title at 8 a.m. Before we get started, I do have to remind you that Salesforce is a publicly traded company, so please make all your purchasing decisions based on what is currently generally available. You will hear this a lot this week. I'm Beth Breisness. I am a member of technical staff at Salesforce.org on the nonprofit product team, and I'm a board game addict. And I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Randy Wilson, who is also an MTS at Salesforce.org. We're on the same team, and she moonlights as an amateur food critic. So I would like to get a quick pulse of the room. How many of you are ISVs? Fantastic. Other consulting partners? Yeah, a few? Okay, and how many of you would identify as developers? Almost all of you. Fantastic. All right. And are any of you already using custom metadata in your apps or your orgs? A handful. Awesome. Wow, actually, that's great. All right. So today we're here to tell you a tale of rollups, and that's unfortunately not these rollups, but these rollups. These, otherwise known as donor statistics, are a key feature of the product that Randy and I work on. It's the Nonprofit Success Pack. Which is an app exchange product built for nonprofits by Salesforce.org. So among other things, the Nonprofit Success Pack helps nonprofit organizations all around the world manage their fundraising efforts. But rather than force our users to run complex reports to see summarized donation information on contacts or household accounts, we've built these roll-up fields like this directly into our product. And these summarize that data in lots of different variations directly on accounts and contacts. We have 87 standard roll-up fields like this built into our product. This is just a screenshot of a handful of them, just to give you the idea. So you might think 87, totally enough. Like, how could they possibly want more? But they did. Our users, our subscribers came back to us. They wanted more. They wanted more flexibility. They wanted to create their own roll-ups. They had all these wild ideas. They were way more creative than we ever were, which of course is always the way. So we recently rewrote the calculation engine that calculates these roll-ups for two reasons. One was to support large data volume, and the other was to take advantage of custom metadata. So we now have a custom metadata record behind each one of these calculations that drives it. And that has given our subscribers really unprecedented flexibility to create their own roll-ups and to modify the 87 that we ship with. But with great power comes great responsibility. Thank you. So by the time we had designed this custom metadata type to drive these roll-ups, it was really complex. We have 18 fields with really complicated conditional logic between them. So, and our roll-up engine relies on these custom metadata records being defined in a really precise way. So this is the native UI that comes with custom metadata in setup. It does the job, but it doesn't provide any guidance. It only really gives you simple validation rules. And with such a complex metadata type, we couldn't possibly expect our subscribers to know how to configure a roll-up that our engine could consume without some really serious guidance. So we turned this into this. So many things to notice here. First of all, we have far fewer fields because certain fields only appear conditionally based on other information in the record. We also have field level validation. We have better labels. And we have some guidance text, and there's even more going on here that you can't actually see. So this is a guided experience that empowers our subscribers to leverage our new customizable roll-ups product in a whole new way. So I want to first step back to talk a bit about custom metadata and how it works and why you should all be using it as ISVs. And then we'll come back to the technical details behind this implementation. So we're going to talk about what it is, custom metadata, why you should be using it, and then how to get that guided experience for your admin users to be managing the custom metadata for your apps. Pop quiz at 8:05. What two kinds of information does Salesforce hold? Anyone? Front row, awesome. Data and metadata. So we're really here as ISVs, right, to talk about metadata. This is the information that drives our apps, that configures the behavior of our apps. And until you're all familiar with standard and custom data, that's table stakes. And until recently, though, all we had was standard metadata. We had validation rules, various settings, things like that. But as of a couple years ago, we now have access to custom metadata types. So this means that now, just like an org might have many validation rules in it, an org might have many warranty settings, records configured, or sales tax rules configured. So when you're setting these up in setup, they look quite a bit like setting up a custom object. But instead of _C for your custom object API name, you get _MDT for metadata. And at first, when you configure the metadata type, you have a name and a developer name, and then you get custom fields, just like a custom object. But then when you go to manage them, things shift to looking a little bit more like custom settings. And you have this manage button. So in our case here, we have a button back there in the metadata settings that says manage rollups to create, view, and edit metadata records. That's the native UI. All right, now that you've got a little bit about what custom metadata is, for those of you who weren't already using it, let's talk about why. How many of you are thinking this? Why not just use those custom settings that have been here forever? This sure sounds a lot like list custom settings, doesn't it? This is my favorite slide in this deck because I have very strong feelings about list custom settings. They are dead to me. But in all seriousness, I have reasons for this. Custom metadata types are just a lot better. Just frankly, they're better. They're more powerful than list custom settings. So I'm not going to read through every line in this table, but I am going to highlight a couple of them. So first, I want to call out entity relationships. This is a place where CMTs really, really shine. So you can have a custom metadata record that actually looks up to an object definition or a field definition. So not the field value of a particular record, but the field definition itself. So in our case, that's how we drive our rollups, right? The result of this rollup calculation goes into this field on any given record. So we have a lookup to that field definition. And you'll see a little bit more on that later. Secondly, as of quite recently, custom metadata records are now available in validation rules and formulas. So this is really powerful for the admins using your apps. They can now leverage the same app configuration information in their validation rules and formulas that they're creating as you are using in your managed code. Finally, I want to call out record and field level control. So custom metadata types have been designed with really, really granular controls, and so granular that I have a whole slide on it. So, as I said before, when you create a new custom metadata type, there are two standard fields, developer name and label. Every custom metadata type has those two fields. Then from there, you're adding custom fields, just like a custom object. And they get that _C notation, just like a custom object. So here we have two custom fields. When you create a custom field, you get to define whether it's subscriber editable or upgradable. So here I have edit me, just for the sake of clarity, that is subscriber editable, and upgrade me, that is upgradable. So when you push, when you deploy metadata records, custom metadata records with your package, you can push them as public or protected. So our top line here, the orange line, represents a public managed record. So this is a record that you published with your app and pushed as public. On that record, that subscriber editable field is editable by your subscriber. Makes sense. But the upgradable field, you can edit the value of that field on the record, that you've pushed, in a push upgrade of your app. And the second row, the purple, represents a protected managed record. So on that one, the subscriber can't touch that subscriber editable field because you've pushed this as protected. But you can still push the upgradable field. That subscriber editable field is essentially locked forever once you push it, if that record is protected. The last row here represents an unmanaged record. So this would have been either deployed with an unmanaged package, created fresh by an admin, new, or cloned from one of your managed records. And this record, you have no control over. But your app can use it, right? So your apps can still leverage the configuration information that the admins have created on their own. But you don't know that record exists, and you cannot touch the values on it as an ISV. So the upshot here is you have a lot of control. There are a ton of settings, and you can be really granular about what the subscriber can touch, what you retain control over, but your app can use all of it. So just to review, we should all be using custom metadata. List custom settings are dead. A few cons to call out. You cannot use direct DML from Apex. And we're going to get into that in our demo. So you have to touch these records from Apex using the Metadata API. It's not direct DML. That being said, you can't delete records via the Metadata API. So we got around that by using isDeleted flag, just a Boolean field on the custom metadata type that our engine respects. So it's essentially an update, but we're just checking that it is deleted. You can delete through the native UI still, though, if you need to. And finally, that native UI is limited, but that's why we're here, to talk about providing better guided user experiences, which brings me back to turning this into this. So we did have one other reason besides that complex validation I talked about to go with a custom UI, and that's custom metadata hierarchy. So you can see here our custom UI for building a custom metadata type called filter group, which has a child custom metadata type called filter rule. And these are connected via a lookup on filter rule to filter group. So yes, you can have relationships between two different custom metadata types. So with our custom UI, we can get all of this on one screen and allow our users to create a group and all of its rules in one go on one screen versus having to create the rule and then go manually create create the group and manually create each rule on a new screen. So let's get back to our primary reason for creating a custom guided user experience. We wanted to ensure that our subscribers followed the rules of what a rollup needs to look like for our engine. And ultimately, we just wanted to make it really easy for them to succeed and nearly impossible for them to fail at creating a good rollup record. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Compare these two screenshots. This is the dropdown for the amount field in the native UI on the left and our custom UI on the right. So the amount field is what tells our engine how to sort the child records in a rollup calculation in the case of a minimum or maximum operation. So here, imagine we've already selected opportunity as our object, so we know we're rolling up opportunities to an account. And we want to return something from the smallest opportunity. So we have a minimum operation selected. But smallest opportunity based on what? Right? How do we order those opportunities when we want to look for the smallest one? How do we tell them what order in line to get? So that's what the amount field means. You might think, obviously, well, it's the amount field, it's the opportunity amount, but it isn't necessarily always. So we have to select it. So what's the difference between these two screenshots? other than just Lightning styling? Okay, we've shown that it's required. What else? It shows what object it's from. Yeah, it shows opportunity. There's one more, the most important one in my mind. Bingo, excellent, yes. So in our custom UI, we've filtered the user's options to only number, currency, and percentage fields. So those are fields that make sense in the context of a minimum or a maximum. So say we gave them the native UI, and the user went in and selected campaign ID, for instance. And our engine is like, what is a minimum campaign ID? It makes no sense. Our engine wouldn't know what to do with that. So this is the power of having the custom UI. We can give our user that guidance to say, okay, we're on an amount field. In this context, these are your only options that make logical sense. So those are the only options we're going to present you with. So here's where we will head into the how, and how we were able to take this custom UI and Lightning components and trace that all the way through to actually managing our custom metadata types. And with that, I will hand it off to Randy.
Awesome, thank you, Beth. Great, so let's look at customizable rollups and also take a look at some code as well. I try to touch that the least amount. And you can also see that here we have our CMTs deployed into our org. So here are all of those custom metadata type records that our app is leveraging. So let's take a look at our customizable rollup feature here, jumping from our NPSP settings page to our customizable rollup custom UI. So here you can see that we have our 87 standard rollups all displayed here, just displayed easily in a Lightning data table. It does a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So let's take a look at one of these specific rollups, for instance, the last gift amount. So what this rollup is doing here is we are looking for the last gift amount. So here we are looking at the amount field and getting the last based on the opportunity close date. So that's the way that we are filtering these rollups from end to end and just sorting them in that specific way. So let's say I wanted to make an edit to this rollup here. I would click the edit button. And let's say the date field for my organization is different. I want to order these in a slightly different way. Let's say the acknowledgement date is more important to my organization here. So what you'll be able to see is on this page over here in our custom UI, we'll just display a quick toast and say, hey, wait, we're going to deploy this. And then in our deployment settings over here, we'll see that the deployment has succeeded successfully. So I'll click that save button and the toast pops up. And over here, sometimes it's fast enough to catch it. Other times I have to refresh. We can see that this is that deployment. We can view the details and see that 1 out of 1 components has deployed successfully. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at the Metadata API code that is powering this change. All right, so first, when the user clicks that save button in our custom UI, we call the save rollup function, and that's what's going to kick things off in our JavaScript. This is that JavaScript function that is called the save rollup, and what it does is it calls a method in the Apex controller called save rollup, and to it passes a JSON string of that current rollup information. And it's going to be that Apex method that will ultimately fire the metadata deployment via the metadata API because we can't access that on the front end. And since that is going to be an asynchronous call, all we can do here in our callback function in the success response is to poll for the deployment status, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. So we have our callback set up, and now we're sending our JSON into the Apex method here. So what that's going to do in the save rollup method is we're going to deserialize that JSON that we've passed over. Okay, so we're going to deserialize that JSON into something that the metadata API can use here, the custom metadata. We'll do a little bit of validation to ensure that we aren't reusing any of our target fields, and then we're going to queue up the custom metadata for deployment and then deploy it. And when we have queued up that deployment and finally deployed it, it will return a string that is the metadata API deployment job ID, and that's going to be important, and we're going to use that to check the status of our deployment as we go along. Okay, so in our Apex, we have created our CMT from the JSON, we have queued it up, and we have started our asynchronous deployment. Everybody with me so far? Hopefully the diagram is helping here. It's a little complex. So now let's jump into the deploy CMT part of this. It's where it gets really interesting, and we start accessing the metadata API. So here we have converted those JSON string into a list of custom metadata objects that our Metadata API can make use of. So here it actually looks pretty simple here. We can add them to the metadata deployment container to set everything up. We create a callback function so the deployment knows what to do once the deployment is completed asynchronously, and we enqueue it. So this is pretty straightforward, and this is what's provided with the Metadata API. So here we have that metadata callback that will be called once the deployment is done. And so at this point, we're done with Apex, and we're ready to jump back into the JavaScript and into our save rollup function. So what we're doing is we will be passing this job ID, and that's that reference to the deployment. Now, please note here that it's not actually the deployment ID. We're not able to query that directly. So it's an ID that we have derived in order to be able to check the uniqueness of this specific ID, and that's why we need to carry it back into the front end. So now that we've returned from that, we are ready for our callback function on the front end, which is what we'll start polling to monitor for the deployment. So the polling will happen every 2 seconds, up to a max of about 90 seconds. We don't want our users to wait forever for a deployment. And what this is going to do is it will call get deployment status on the back end, which is actually what we'll be querying for that update on the deployment status. And that's what this server call is doing, this get deployment status. You'll find it's a little specific to our project, and you may find that your code mileage may vary. But what it's doing is we store the deployment status in a custom setting, we'll get back to that, and we deserialize that result to check and see if it has our new unique job ID. So if it has the job ID and if it was successful, we'll query for our new CMT and pass it back to the JavaScript, refresh the page, and we're good. So, like Beth referred to earlier, we don't want to talk about list custom settings anymore, but hierarchical custom settings do still have a lot of value for us. And the main reason that we are making use of it here is that we need that DML safety blanket. It's something that's important to us. So for this field specifically, the reason that we're using it is it needs to record the status of an asynchronous metadata API deployment in some place that an Apex page controller can find it and can query for it directly. So let's say instead of using a custom setting to store this information, we were using a CMT as well. We might find that we have one CMT deployment, and that deployment fails. And then we have a second deployment, and that's the deployment that's supposed to tell us about the first deployment, and we just don't know where we are. We end up in a little bit of a catch-22 situation here. And so for that reason, we need to store this information in a custom setting, or you could even use an S object, just something that has that direct DML access, and it's not something that's happening asynchronously. But looking forward for us, we do plan to use CMTs more for our settings data over custom settings, except in cases where we need to be sure of the save, or if we are using hierarchical custom settings. Oh, you can pass me water. Okay, so let's review here. So we have our deployment status method that's going to get our job ID, and that's what our polling function has passed to it. And using that, it's going to check a custom setting that has that ID. Now, at some point, our deployment is going to finish, and that's when this callback function is going to be accessed. And what it will do, that callback function, is it will take that same job ID that we're using in Apex, and we'll put it in the custom setting, along with the status of the deployment, whether it was successful or it failed or something else happened. So one of two things can happen here when the deployment status checks this custom setting. So either the deployment status is going to call custom settings, and it's going to say, hey, I have a match. Deployment's done. We can move on, and we can finish the polling on the front end. Or alternatively, it will check and say, oh, I don't have a match yet. The deployment is still in process, and I still need to return back and continue to poll on the front end. So either way, we will return to the JavaScript with a status of, is the deployment completed, yes or no, and we'll jump back to our polling callback function. Give you a second to take that in. Okay, so back on the front end, this is our success callback. We will check to see if the deployment was completed and if we have a match, which we will know by looking to see if the is completed flag is set to true and if we have a rollup item returned. So if it was, we will show a success toast and we'll refresh the data. Otherwise, we'll drop into this first else, where we will just continue to recursively call the same function, just a basic polling JavaScript setup function here. So if we do timeout, we'll stop checking and we'll throw a timeout toast. And just because the timeout has happened here, it doesn't actually indicate that there was a deployment failure. There may just be a lot of deployment activities happening in this specific org, and we usually just ask our users to wait or to try again when they're not deploying quite as much activity at that time. Okay, so here we're going to continue to poll until we get that completed status, or we reach a timeout, and then either way, we're going to show a toast, and we're done. This is a good point to take pictures. This is the end of the diagram. Any quick burning questions on the information presented here? We've left a few things intentionally vague, but if there's any things that don't quite make sense, we can answer them now. Just a quick question.
At the end there, it seems like a prime candidate for platform events.
We're going to get to that. You're jumping ahead.
Thank you.
So here, we don't want to use a change set. Yeah, so the question here was why deploy using not using change sets, not using a change set deployment. So here in this specific case, it's because we want it to be consistent, whereas a change set, like an admin would have to go and like create the change set and deploy it and do something fresh. We want everything to be handled here via the code. That's a good question, and something to carry over from org to org. A change set might be a little bit of a better candidate, but if you want to do it through code, this is a great way to do it. Okay, so we'll take the rest of the questions at the end. And now let's get back to our demo and talk about the real value of a guided user experience. All right, let's see if I can find my cursor. Okay. So now let's talk about what makes this a guided user experience. And this concept is especially important when you talk about something that's pretty complex like Rollups here. So we provide CMTs in order to provide a continuing value for an existing feature. But the real power that we're giving to our users here is that a customer gets to create a new rollup for themselves. And this is something that can be fully customizable to their business needs and their solutions, not just something that we're packaging to all of our customers. So if a user wants to create a new CMT, and we wanted to use the standard UI, here we click the new button. And you'll see they're immediately presented with these 18 fields. We've seen this screenshot a couple times here, and they don't really know where to begin or exactly what the parameters are for what they're trying to create. And some of these fields don't make sense, and they're not necessary in every single use case. So for instance, this integer field, it's not really clear. The integer of what? How would I use it? Are there any limits? It's just not exactly clear, and you don't really have information on how the engine works using the standard UI. So by contrast, let's create a new rollup here. And to start, we only give our users two fields. We say, where is this information going to be coming from? What's the target object? And what's the target field? So this is a custom field that we ask our users to create to store this information. So we do ask them to begin with the end in mind, but we are going to help guide them to get there and create this custom metadata type. So in this case, you can see this list will change dynamically, and we're also filtering out intelligently fields that we know are not going to be useful to our users. So here we are filtering out any standard fields, anything that's unwritable, any system fields, and also any custom fields that are already in use by another rollup, because we don't want two rollups to try and update the same field, or the information makes no sense in that specific field. Versus you can see here in the standard UI, if I go to create an account here, then this target field is dozens of fields long, and a lot of them won't make sense and might even give me an error at some point. So here, to demonstrate the power of this custom UI, I would like for us to create a really unique rollup. So this is the account largest gift campaign this year, or in other words, which campaign from this year brought in the largest response from this particular account. So here you'll notice I am rolling up to a lookup field, and the field name here will be the largest gift campaign this year. So this is a really powerful use case for lookup fields, and we actually don't package any lookup fields, but they are a great use case that we encourage our customers to take advantage of with the customizable rollups. Okay, so we'll select largest gift campaign this year, and I've already created this field over here for myself just to make it a little simpler. You can see the data type is lookup, and has that same question that we're looking to answer. So the description field then pops up next, and this is a field that should inform other admins what this field does, but you'll notice here we don't have any rollup name or rollup label, and we made the decision not to give those fields to our users because we just sort of figured it was going to be a concatenation of the object and the target field. We wanted to remove one additional decision for our users when they really didn't need to make that decision. But if there is any additional information they need about this field, the description field is where they would put it. So next, the operation is what is going to drive the amount field, and we'll see that in a minute. So we'll pick largest is what we're looking for. And now for time frame, you'll see if I select days back, this is that integer field. But here we're able to give it context and say what this field actually means. By having an integer field that is intentionally vague, I'm able to use it for days back or for years ago. And so here I do want to use the this year field. Now for rollup type, I'll pick opportunity account, and you'll notice there were hard credit, soft credit options, but we're not going to get into that too much. If you have questions about it, come ask us about it afterwards. Filter group, I only want to look at opportunities that have been won and have been closed successfully. So now here, in my filter rollup here, if I'm looking at the opportunity object, you'll see if I look in my custom metadata types and I say, okay, my detail object is going to be opportunity, field to roll up. Again, I have dozens of fields. I don't really know where to start. And again, some of these won't work or they may cause errors. In our custom UI, we give them exactly one decision. There's only one field that will populate correctly, which is the campaign ID to a campaign type lookup. So filtering by type, it alleviates a lot of user pain and errors here. So opportunity close date. That will be how we are using the time frame in order to order these specific opportunities, and then the opportunity amount to figure out which is the largest of these. So we'll save it, and then we'll actually show you what this rollup does. So here I've created an account, the Schmates Foundation, and you'll see that that custom field is available in my Details tab, but hasn't been populated yet because I don't have any opportunities. So let's make a few of those. All right, we'll make a donation. Call this the big gift for the Schmates. And the campaign here is an amazing campaign. It went really well, and this was a gift for $15,000. Stage is closed 1. Close date is today. Create one more. And this one will be a little smaller, so we'll call this one the smaller gift. Also for the Schmates Foundation. This campaign didn't go quite as well, but the gift was for $1,000. Closed 1, close date also today. I'll make one final gift. We'll call this the bigger gift. Also for the same account. But this was for an older campaign. This was a campaign that was a couple years ago. We just haven't updated our system information yet for $150,000. But our close date would have been a couple years ago, so we'll put it in 2016. Okay, so I have these 3 opportunities. Let's take a look at them. So I have big gift, $15,000, a close date of today for the amazing campaign. A small gift for $1,000, a close date of today for the not so amazing campaign. And finally, bigger gift for $150, close date of more than a year ago in the old campaign. Which campaign would I expect to see in this rollup field? If I'm looking for a campaign, let's take a look. So I'll go back to my account here. And this is run to get the amazing campaign, which was what we'd expect for the 2 that were for this year and the larger of the 2. All right, go back to the presentation here. Okay, so where do we go from here? Specifically, we would like to explore more about using platform events, whereas here we're using JavaScript polling. Platform events were just starting to be rolled out when we started this project, and we really would like to refactor at some point, but definitely future projects we plan to use platform events. We would also like to explore more the upgradable and subscribable editable fields in our future rollups and future features in our org. I want to say a bit about that.
In the 4th edition of his Advanced Apex Programming book. So if you're curious to explore these patterns in a bit more depth, do pick up a new copy of Dan's book. And there's a lot more detail in there.
And he has a presentation, I believe, tomorrow.
Yeah, he has a couple 20-minute theater presentations on these patterns at a bit higher level as well, tomorrow and Thursday.
And if you haven't started using CMTs already, take a look at these 2 trailheads, custom metadata types and the Apex Metadata API. Highly recommend, and we definitely hope you guys are excited about using CMTs, as we are too. Any questions?
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, can you say it into the mic, please? Thanks.
Is your code open source so we can dig in and...
It sure is. Thanks for asking. So one of the great things about our product at salesforce.org is that the whole thing is open source. So you can go on GitHub, and the user is Salesforce Foundation, which is our old name, and the repo is called Cumulus, and that is the entire nonprofit success pack, and it's all in there. Yeah. Yes. Can you come up to the mic, please? Thank you.
We built a custom lookup we built. So what is the role of custom metadata in that? So in that there is no relation of custom metadata, right? Or there also there was some relation.
So in the example of the lookup to the campaign, so it's a custom metadata record that's driving the calculation to determine what value goes in that custom lookup field.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of engine code behind the scenes that's happening as well that we weren't able to show here, but yeah, you can definitely take a look more in the code base.
Okay. So what was the logic like to select the right opportunity, what was the logic?
Yeah, so for this specific one, so we were looking at, Beth, you can probably break this down a little. There we go.
There we go.
One touch.
Okay, so we were looking for I just want to get the field name up. So the largest gift campaign this year. So for this account, let's look at all of their gifts from this year, all their opportunities. We call opportunities gifts sometimes in the nonprofit world. So look at all their opportunities from this year. Sort them by amount, which is what was driven by the amount field down here. So we're going to look at the opportunity amount, take the largest one, which is our operation, and then what we want to roll up from that largest gift is the campaign. So we want to know which campaign brought in their biggest opportunity this year. Okay, so then we can look across all of our accounts and say which campaign was, by that definition, the most successful, that it brought in a lot of really big gifts. It inspired people to donate to our organization at a higher level this year.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Hi.
Hi. The admins that are using this feature are effectively doing deployments to the org. So,
Correct.
Are there permissions that will allow certain people to do it and certain people not to do it? And what permissions are those?
Great question. In order to run this code, you need customized app, which basically means you have to be an admin, because you don't really give that permission to non-admins. That's sort of what makes an admin an admin. So you do have to have customized app. I have talked with product managers about giving us a way to open that up a little bit more and be a bit more granular and let, maybe like a fundraising manager wants to create some new, or like work with an admin to create some new rollups. It's on their radar. I don't know that it's on their roadmap yet, but it is on their radar. But right now you do have to have customized app in order to use this UI. So in fact, where Randy showed the, back from our settings page where she clicked the button to access this UI, we actually hide that button if you're not an admin, so that we don't even give you hope. Yes?
Yeah, good question. I was here late, so I missed something. Just on the roadmap, is there a way, would in the future, now you have to use API to do the update, insert, whatever. Would there any way to provide some API code? We can do it easily?
No, that's not on the roadmap. One thing you will be able to do that we didn't mention in winter, as of winter 19, which is the release coming out right now, you can instantiate custom metadata records in memory in Apex, which will be really handy for testing. If any of you were at my session on custom metadata last year and saw the big rigmarole we had to go through with mocking for testing and the step API and all those hoops, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just instantiate the record as you need it for your tests, run your tests, and then you're done. But not hitting DML directly from Apex. You will still have to use the metadata API.
Okay,
it's very well documented.
It helps for unit tests for sure.
Yeah, huge
another
help
thing
for
is,
unit tests.
I know the size limit is 10 meg, right? Is there any way you can make it bigger?
For what, sorry?
Custom metadata. The size limit is, government is 10 meg, right? 10 megabytes?
I don't know.
It is 10 megabytes, I believe.
Yeah.
So is there a way, would it be in the future, make it bigger?
I'm not aware of that being on their radar, but I haven't asked. So you could ask the PM, who looks like he did not make it this morning. I tried to get him here, I'm sorry.
All right.
His name is Vladimir. You can go talk to him. Hi.
So if we were editing one of these rollup fields, would you be able to use Lightning Data Service to actually load the record?
To do what to the record?
To load the rollup record?
I'm not sure how Lightning Data Service would play into this. If you had another component on the record home, you would have access to the field value. Our rollups are calculating based on triggers from the child records.
I think we looked at it originally, and there were some additional requirements that didn't quite work for us, and LDS was still a little newer. But I think it is possible with just regard to specific CMTs.
Any other questions? We'll hang out outside for a few minutes if you want to come and have us out there. Thanks so much for coming. Have a great Dreamforce.